Sorry about that, folks. Ontario Ancestors has over 30 branches and special interest groups all across Ontario, including the Essex County branch. The Essex Branch Family History Collections are housed in 2 locations. The Essex Branch Collection is housed at the Windsor Public Library Local History Branch on Sandwich Street in Windsor. And the Franco-Ontarian Research Center Collection is housed at the former Maryvale Convent on Prince Road in Windsor. Visit our Essex Branch website for the more details and directions. And definitely come for a visit. We always like to connect with people interested in genealogy and local history. You can connect with us at these emails. You can also join the branch Facebook groups with hundreds of people who are interested in genealogy and local history. And be sure to visit the Essex Branch website that has many resources, both for our branch members, but also just for the general public. We look forward to connecting with you. Our next webinar will be on April 14th at 7 p.m. when we step back in time to learn about the history of the rum runners in Essex County, including some memorable characters and events. Everyone is welcome to attend the event. Just register on our website. Now, for tonight's presentation, we are very pleased to have local historians and authors Elaine Weeks and Chris Edwards discuss their newest book, A River Runs Between Us, which examines the unique relationship shared history between Windsor and Detroit. Elaine has a BA in English from the University of Windsor, plus 2 years of postgraduate studies in visual arts. She's a community builder with over 30 years experience in advertising, public relations, event planning, publishing, writing, editing, photography, conservation. I can't even say that right. Conservation and heritage preservation. Her actions earned her the 2004 Windsor Chamber of Commerce Business Excellence Award. And she also has authored a novel, Time Trespasser, A Man, His Slaves, A Crack in Time, and is working on a sequel. Chris holds a master's in arts and communication studies degree from the University of Windsor and has been an instructor at the University of Windsor at St. Clair College and Elder College. He is a publisher, photographer, digital design pioneer, educator, and world traveler, which we know because he will tell you where he's joining us from tonight, which is amazing. Chris has co-owned 3 advertising marketing agencies, worked at one of Canada's original internet solution startups, and has managed numerous traditional and new media projects. Welcome, Elaine and Chris. Thank you for joining us. We'll pass it over to you now. Sorry for all the stumbling.
No worries.
No problem.
Thank you so much. Nice
All right.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good evening, good morning for me, because I'm in Bali, Indonesia. So thank you for that introduction. What I propose to do today is to discuss how we came to develop this latest project, this book project, and examine some of the content that's in the book, this unique shared relationship between Windsor and Detroit, and then Elaine will be reading from the book itself, some terrific stories that we found. So I hope everybody finds it entertaining, and I think we should just jump in. So our book, The River Runs Between Us, has an interesting backstory, but I think we'll start with the book itself and how Windsor and Detroit progressed as twin cities divided by a river, yet united by history. So our story is one that helped shape North America and the world, from indigenous trade routes, the arrival of the French settlers, the Underground Railroad, cross-border trade, the automotive innovations, war production, labor movements, and cultural exchange. And our story, as it connects to all of this, began with Walkerville Publishing in 1999. So we're happy to say we've been in business 27 years, and we've authored now 10 books. Um, at the time when we started this project, we had authored 7 books. So we've been sharing the unique shared, well, there's a redundancy, but the unique shared history of Windsor and Detroit. We launched the Walkerville Times, which you see on the left of your screen, in 1999. We published the last edition in 2015, and the Walkerville Times was a publication that honored local history. It was very well received by the community, and from that we developed a series, our local history series, which began with the Best of Times magazine in 2004, which was award-winning, and happy to say that of our 9 books, 6 of them have been considered bestsellers in Canada. So there's been a great appetite and demand for local history through our books. But we faced a dilemma in I'm using 2 hands here, so we faced a dilemma in 2018 in that we had quite a few titles, and we had noticed that the sale of books was getting more and more difficult. So we were challenged with how can we generate some interest in our books. And Elaine and I came up with the idea that we should have an exhibit in the Arts Council Art Speak Gallery in Walkerville. And as we progressed with that idea, we came up with this idea that we would have 2 walls because the space kind of is very long and narrow. And on the one side, we would have images of Detroit, and on the other side, we'd have images of Windsor, and it would connect to each other. And we would call this A River Runs Between Us. And Elaine came up with the idea, well, we'll put a blue rug down on the floor, and that will symbolize the river and how we're joined together. And we were quite amazed that we had so much information about both sides of the river, having worked on numerous projects related to um, the history of both communities and how they connected to each other. And the uh, presentation was very well received. We actually had a wall you can see up in the right corner that we had. Elaine came up with the idea that we should do a selfie wall so people could be in the tunnel in 1950. And so that was that was a lot of fun. And it was a very interesting um, presentation for us because it really generated a lot of sales, which was the goal. But one of the things that everybody kept asking was, where's the book? And we kept saying, what book? And then they said, well, A River Runs Between Us. We said, well, it's not a book, it's an exhibit. Well, you should do a book. And this is in 2017, Christmas. So we decided, well, maybe we should do the book. And we rolled the project out in 2018 as part of many, many other projects. And in that space of time, we released another book called Windsor Before and After. And then we kept going at the project, and COVID hit, and it was really tough to do research in Detroit because a lot of the research we do is still in libraries, and we like to get our hands into the books, the old books, and a lot of them are unavailable except for at the Burton Collection, etc. So that slowed our project down. Then we abandoned the project and we restarted it, and finally, uh, this last year now, 2025, we came out with the book. So it was a 7-year project, and it was the longest project we've ever worked on. But we're really thrilled with the results. And one of the things that came out of it was when the book arrived, Elaine looked at the book and she said, this is not just a local story, this is a world story. This is a global phenomenon. These 2 cities, one in one country, one in another country. So what we did was we post book, we broke it down into 6 ways we changed the world. So I'd like to just examine that if we could. Obviously, the first one is the rise of Detroit's automotive industry, which is the stuff of business legend. Uh, Windsor's important role in the birth of the auto industry is less widely recognized. Really, really fits in with the times today. The reason why Henry Ford and other auto manufacturers looked at Windsor as a place to develop cars was because of tariffs, if that sounds familiar. In 1904, the British the British market was a huge market for automobiles. Um, Much bigger than the American market. So the automotive makers said, well, if we make cars in America, we're going to have to pay tariffs. So they looked over at Windsor and said, well, this is a perfect setup. We can organize our auto industry in Windsor, and then we'll be able to avoid tariffs. So initially, they were just assembling cars in Windsor, making the parts in Detroit, and that grew into Ford City, and a huge phenomenon came out of that. So Henry Ford, the way he changed the world, I'm just got to remember what I'm doing here. Henry Ford, let's just look at he was known as the Wizard of Dearborn. He came over to Windsor and realized that there was a great opportunity to develop automobiles worldwide. And in fact, until the 1950s, Ford of Canada was based in Windsor, and Ford of Canada was in charge of Ford worldwide. So Ford in England, Ford in New Zealand, Ford in India. And that was quite a thing because Henry Ford realized that it would make sense to run the operation. But what Henry Ford did is he revolutionized the way he changed the world. He revolutionized manufacturing with the assembly line. And the way he came up with the idea of the assembly line is they went to Chicago and watched how the Chicago um, uh, but particularly the chicken processing industry, how they deassembled an animal by using this moving line. And they said, well, we could create an assembly line using that technology, and it made mass producing automobiles faster and cheaper. And he put the world on wheels, Henry Ford, because he made it affordable for families. He created the modern middle class by paying high wages and settling labor standards, despite all the turmoil that was created through the labor, and actually helped launch the labor movement. He transformed global industry, influencing everything from factory design to supply chain, which is still in use today. So Henry Ford really changed the world. Um, Through our research, we found this phenomenal photo. And one of the things we did in this book, and again, this is before AI, is because we had a lot of time, especially during COVID, is we colorized the photos, the black and white photos. We colorized them by hand using digital technology, but I literally painted all of these photos. I found out the technique. And so we took these beautiful black and white photos. So for the first time ever, we brought them to life. Now, of course, as soon as the book came out, AI perfected the ways to colorize photos. So, there's probably thousands of hours of work that didn't have to be done. But Henry Leyland Falconeers, he really pioneered the auto industry, and he's kind of unheralded. So we thought we would mention them in the book. He was a Detroit pioneer, and he founded the Cadillac Automotive Company, and he also founded the Lincoln Motor Company. Both Lincoln was purchased by Ford, and Cadillac was purchased by General Motors. And at the beginning of the 20th century, there were dozens of automotive pioneers in Detroit. Detroit was perfectly set up to become an automotive pioneer because they had been manufacturing train cars and other things, stoves. It was the wood stove capital of the world. So Detroit was well positioned, embraced the automobile, and the rest is history. For us, let me get this thing to work. An interesting connection is the Dodge brothers. The Dodge brothers came to Detroit uh, in the 1880s to work in the iron works. Henry and or John and Horace Dodge. Um, in 1892, the Dodge brothers crossed the river and came to work at Windsor Dominion Typography. They had financial backing from Fred Evans, and they launched the see if I can get my act together, Evans and Dodge Bicycle Company. And they in 1897 they created a patent on an adjustable dirt-proof ball bearing for bicycle hubs. If I had a pointer, you can see the part of the bike where the pedals are. That's where the ball bearing was. And these tended to get really full of mud and jam up. So they pioneered a way to fix that. And they were located at Ferry Hill in Windsor, Ferry Hill being the foot of Willette at Riverside. And they were able to build this company up, and they sold it to the National Cycle and Automotive Company. And they once they sold that, that company became CCM, the Canadian Cycle Manufacturers. John married his first wife, Ivy Hawkins of Windsor, in 1892. They lived in Windsor Walkerville during the years when they operated their business here. And then John married his second wife, also of Walkerville, Isabel Smith. The marriage was kept private. It wasn't publicly known because she was his housekeeper and they didn't want to have a scandal. So the Dodge brothers actually went on to uh, at one point, John Dodge was the head of Henry Ford's Ford Motor Company, and they were Ford's biggest supplier. They also supplied parts for all the other manufacturers, and they eventually founded the Dodge brothers in Hamtramck, and they were automotive pioneers and really an important part of automotive history and a great connection in that they started in Windsor. So when Henry Ford built his company up, at a certain point in the 1920s, Detroit became the richest city in the world because of automotive manufacturing. And Henry Ford took this photo in 1916 and he gathered 20,000 of his employees from the Highland Park Assembly Plant and the grounds to hear a speech by President Woodrow Wilson. They calculated the hourly wage of the assembled men in this photo, and it was considered the most expensive photo ever taken in its time. And the only way they could get everybody to come out to ensure it is that they didn't get their paychecks until they were in the photo. So that's a pretty cool piece of local history. And in Windsor, here's a photo of the Ford assemblymen in I don't know the exact year. Let me see if I got this written down somewhere.
1910.
I think it's around 1910, 1915. And this is a photo of Windsor men facing from Juillard Road facing east at the Ford Assembly. So that's what we've done in the book. We've juxtaposed imagery from one side of the river with imagery from the other side of the river in facing pages. So everything that's in the book has to connect to both sides. And quite a challenge, but it was a lot of fun to produce as well. Another way we changed the world is the Underground Railroad. Windsor and Amherstburg were the terminals of the Underground Railroad, serving as the primary crossing point for thousands of freedom seekers escaping slavery in the southern USA. Together, Windsor and Amherstburg transformed from simple entry points into thriving Black communities where refugees built new lives as free citizens. The Underground Railroad's impact stretched far beyond the banks of Detroit River, fundamentally altering the course of North American history and the global fight for human rights. Sandwich, on the Windsor side of the river, was one of the most important Canadian terminals of the Underground Railroad. Freedom seekers crossed the Detroit River to this historic settlement where Black churches, safe houses, and local residents helped them rebuild their lives. For many, Sandwich and Amherstburg were the first places they ever stood on free soil, marking as a symbol of hope, refuge, and a new beginning. Amherstburg was known as the Great Landing Place. Amherstburg, located at the mouth of the Detroit River, was the most important entry point to freedom in Canada. Thousands of freedom seekers landed here, guided by local Black communities, churches, and abolitionist networks. With its fort, mission, and safe haven settlement, Amherstburg became a gateway to new lives, making it one of the most significant terminals of the Underground Railroad. Very important to our history. Connected to that is Walter Perry. In the 1930s, Walter Perry, known as Mr. Emancipation, initiated and organized Windsor, Ontario's Emancipation Day celebrations. During its heyday from the 1930s to the 1960s, The celebration was so massive, it would frequently double the population of Windsor, drawing over 100,000 visitors annually from Canada and the United States. Oh, I got a little trouble here. Bear with me for a second, folks. Come on. Here we go. Okay. In the 1930s, due to widespread racism, African Canadians rarely saw beautiful, well, African North Americans, I guess, rarely saw beautiful Black women represented in advertisements or fashion magazines. Women of color were often barred from participating in mainstream beauty pageants. In the 1930s, Walter Perry introduced the first annual Miss International Sepia pageant as the highlight of Windsor's Emancipation Day Festival. This pageant marked an historic moment. For the first time, Black women in North America had the opportunity to compete in a beauty contest. The Miss American pageant, by contrast, did not allow Black contestants until the 1970s. And I absolutely love this photo, which I colorized, that shows the women competing. Competitors for the coveted title came from both sides of the river and competed in evening gown swimmer and talent categories. Local contestants took immense pride in representing Windsor and Essex County. For decades, the crown, though, went to American contestants. Windsor's Joan Hurst became the first Canadian to win the title of Miss International Sepia. Even when the festival ended in the 1960s, the Miss International Sepia pageants continued, extending into the 90s and leaving a legacy of empowerment and pride for Black women across North America. So here's another way we changed the world. During the two great wars, World War I and II, Detroit and Windsor played significant roles in the production of armaments. In World War II, the border communities underwent a near instantaneous transportation from the Motor City to the Arsenal of Democracy, a term coined by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to describe North America's role as the industrial supplier for international powers, for Allied powers. Within months of the Pearl Harbor attack in World War II, Detroit completely halted civilian car production. Every factory was reloaded for war. At Willow Run in Ypsilanti, Ford's massive plant produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes at its peak. A bomber was produced every 63 minutes. Considering that the aircrafts had thousands of parts, it was quite an amazing achievement. And the Chrysler Tank Arsenal built the Sherman tanks in record numbers, outproducing entire nations' capacity to build. GM provided everything from aircrafts to amphibious vehicles and millions of rounds of ammunition. The success of the Arsenal of Democracy cemented the United States as the world's leading industrial and military superpower, a position it held throughout the Cold War. And Windsor played a big role in all of this as well, which is, again, lesser known, but our factories also ramped up to produce war materials, which helped us defeat Nazi fascism. The sheer volume of output changed the trajectory of the 20th century. The Axis powers, Germany and Japan, could not match Detroit and Windsor's manufacturing speed. The Allies didn't just outmaneuver the enemy, they outproduced them, ensuring a steady flow of equipment to the front lines of Europe into position. And the war effort, what it did was it drew hundreds of thousands of workers to our region, Windsor and Detroit, what was called the Second Great Migration, leading to high wages and strong unions. This created the blueprint for modern American middle class and the suburban dreams of the 1950s. And we love to tell the lesser story of the roles that women played during World War II because the men were at war, so the women were recruited to come and work in the factories. While she is now known as a symbol of female empowerment, Rosie the Riveter was a master class in government-orchestrated psychological warfare and recruitment propaganda. With men away at war, Rosie the Riveter became the reality of the workforce. Women and African Americans entered the industrial workforce in record numbers, laying the essential groundwork for civil rights and the women's movement that followed. pretty big impact on the world. A lesser known story, but still having a major impact on the world, was the Parke-Davis Manufacturing Company. Once the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, Parke-Davis and Company was founded in 1871 by Harvey Park and George Davis. They focused on manufacturing high-quality drugs. The company embarked on expeditions all over the world seeking plants and cures in search of medicinal plants. I said that, yeah. In less than 20 years, they developed 50 new drugs. The contribution to medicine from Parke-Davis includes groundbreaking products such as adrenaline, Benadryl, which was the first antihistamine, chloramycetamine, and drugs crucial for the treatment of polio, epilepsy, and tuberculosis. They relocated its operation from downtown Windsor to Joe Campbell Street on the Detroit River in 1873. Pharmaceutical production soon became one of Detroit's largest industries. Parke-Davis pioneered standardization of drug formulation and introduced the concept of quality control. Additionally, one of the company's pharmacists invented an early machine-made gelatin capsule. So that's pretty huge. They also established manufacturing facility in Walkerville, again, to get established into the British Empire, with branch locations in Montreal and Winnipeg. Albert Kahn and Smith Hitchman and Grills contributed to the design of the Detroit facility and also the Windsor facility, ensuring that it was functional and aesthetically pleasing. Okay, they sold its riverfront property in Detroit to the Stroh Brewery Company, 26 buildings on 14 acres. And they proposed the Stroh River Place. That's another story we won't get into today, but it's also in the book what happened there. Excuse me for a sec. Detroit also became a huge influence on the world in terms of music. Motown Records, sorry, didn't just produce hits. It created a sonic assembly line that integrated black music into American radio and redefined the global pop landscape. Founded by Berry Gordy Jr. in 1959, Motown was the first black-owned record label to systematically cross over to white audiences. By blending gospel-rooted soul with polished pop structures, it broke down racial barriers during the height of the civil rights movement. And we love to tell the story of the role that Windsor played in all of this. Motown turned Detroit local talent, the Supremes, the Temptations, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5, into global icons. It proved that black music was simply American music, influencing everything from the British invasion bands to the Beatles to modern R&B and hip hop. While it began as escapist pop, Motown also evolved into a voice for social change in the late 60s and 70s, producing landmark protest art such as Marvin Gaye's What's Going On and Edward Starr's album War. The role that Windsor played in all of this is quite interesting and actually phenomenal, especially the role that Robin Seymour, the disc jockey, who became one of the first disc jockeys in the world to play black music on a white station in Dearborn when he was a disc jockey there. And his boss called him and said, "What is that you're playing?" And Robin Seymour told him, "This is Motown music made in Detroit." And the owner said, "I don't care what it is. It's good. It's great for ratings, so keep it up." So he was the first guy to, what we would say, cross over. But also coupled with this was AM 800 CKLW's format that they adopted. It was known as Bill Drake's Hot Clock format in 1966. Pop stations favored white artists, but CKLW tilted towards soul, rhythm, and blues in a market that was a hotbed of music, including Berry Gordy's celebrated Motown records. Also, the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, was from Detroit, and future rock and roll superstars such as Mitch Ryder, Bob Seger, and Alice Cooper. The 50,000 watt kingmaker of the airwaves, CKLW Windsor Detroit was the primary engine of the 70s pop culture. By bridging the Motown sound with Canadian talents such as the Guess Who, etc., it dictated North American music charts and revolutionized high-energy broadcasting format, proving that a border town signal could dominate the global industry. It was only a matter of time before somebody figured out that Detroit was a huge market and somebody in Windsor could capitalize on it, and CKLW was the one. And we tell the full story of the CKLW phenomenon in the book. Also coupled with that is the power of Rosalie Tremblay. Here we have Rosalie Tremblay with Bob Seger and Bruce Springsteen. Rosalie Tremblay was initially a librarian at CKLW, and she became the music director, known for her golden ear. She could determine what became a hit. If CKLW played a song, it almost inevitably climbed the Billboard 100. Rosalie Tremblay is credited with launching the careers of such luminaries as Tony Orlando, Elton John, Alice Cooper, the Guess Who, Bob Seger, and many others. And there's a great statue dedicated to Rosalie Tremblay appropriately along the riverfront, looking at Detroit. Well, she's looking at, I don't know what side she's looking at. Good question.
Detroit.
She's looking at Detroit, which I think is very appropriate, and it really fits in with the theme of our book. I heard that next month you're going to be talking about prohibition. Really, some of the most popular work we've ever done is on prohibition, and this is a story that keeps on giving. We love talking about prohibition. We love talking about tales of mobsters, murder, and mayhem during the Prohibition era from 1919 to 1933. It's part of Windsor and Detroit's urban legend, a defining era that shaped both cities' histories, economies, and criminal underworlds. Prohibition, as it changed the world, catalyzed the birth of modern organized crime and transformed Windsor and Detroit border into the most lucrative smuggling corridor of the time. By attempting to legislate morality, it inadvertently sparked a jazz age, social revolution, expanded federal law enforcement powers. We were surprised to hear that the Customs and Border Patrol, really the border guards and agents, they only came into existence during Prohibition. Before that, there was no border guards. You could just walk across the border. It was all managed by local militia, etc. So it was in 1922 when the Americans launched U.S. Customs and Service Agency because of Prohibition. So it was really a definitive global case study on the failures of state-mandated temperance. Our area was ground zero. If you look at how perfectly we are situated in terms of smuggling, especially as you get around the LaSalle area, which is full of small islands, you could really hide when it came to smuggling. Excuse me. It's estimated that Canadian smugglers move 75% across liquor across Lake St. Clair, and Detroit rivers to the United States. And this is because Canada had a law that said that it was okay to manufacture liquor as long as it was exported. Well, exported in those days meant you created a customs form that said it was going to Trinidad or Tobago or St. Pierre, Miquelon. And the boat left in the morning and came back 2 hours later. So they had really fast boats back then if they could go all the way to Jamaica and back in 2 hours. A lesser known story, most people have heard of the Purple Gang, but most people do not know of the River Gang, which was equally notorious with strong ties to the Riverside Brewery. The Riverside Brewery was established at the point where Lake St. Clair joined the Detroit River. It was perfect for quick hauls across the river aboard high-speed boats loaded with Riverside beer, dropped off at hidden bays on Belle Isle for distribution in Canada. So the Riverside Brewery was established by the River Gang. I like how they made sure their name was in it. And they hired the brewmaster from Stroh Brewery, who was out of work in Detroit, a German brewmaster. And he developed some pretty sensational beers. for their era, and they'd fill the boat up, go over to Belle Isle where they had the trucks waiting, load the boats and away, or the trucks, and away they'd go. So again, big impact on the world. So how we doing for time? Pretty good. So that is 6 ways that we feel that Detroit and Windsor changed the world. Our book then is really the story of two communities, as we said, border cities, motor cities, sister cities, a unique shared history. And we share it along this river. And we'd like to talk about the river itself. The river is from its headwaters at Windmill Point to the lighthouse at the mouth on Lake Erie. The Detroit River is 28 miles, and it can be crossed by 3 bridges. Well, soon we hope 3 bridges and 2 tunnels. Its shoreline once featured a series of small bays and has been dredged, straightened, and rerouted over time. It connects peoples of 2 nations. It contains a variety of cultural landscapes, from wealthy Detroit suburbs of Grosse Pointe to heavy manufacturing districts of Rouge, Ecorse, and Trenton, posh neighborhoods of East Windsor to historic neighborhoods of Sandwich in the West End. I think I'll jump over that because I want to talk about this guy. Um, one of the main reasons why our area was developed was because of this guy. There, I have read estimates that there were up to 10 million beavers that inhabited our region, which seems crazy, but I've never been able to find statistics that doubt this number, but 10 million. When the French fur trappers came in the 1600s, they wanted to alleviate Europe's insatiable hunger for fur. And it led to the virtual decimation of the beavers. By the 1800s, they were virtually extinct. And the reason why the beavers were so popular is that under Louis XIV, who is known as the Sun King in France, the Canadian beaver was elevated from a forest rodent to a strategic imperial asset. The global demand for beaver felt hats funded the infrastructure of New France, dictating French colonial policy and reshaping the geopolitical landscape of North America through the 17th century. Brief history, how we're connected. There's these twin churches that face each other next to the Ambassador Bridge. You have the St. Anne's de Detroit and the Assumption Church. And the first thing that Antoine de Lamont Cadillac did when he arrived was to build a church. This was a traditional move, and he established the region as part of France. So he arrived on July 24th, which was St. Anne's Day, and then he laid the foundation for a chapel, hence the name St. Anne de Detroit. It's
In
the
17,
oldest church. Sorry?
just telling the year, 1701.
No, the church was established. Yeah, 1701. Sorry, you're right. Thank you. It's the oldest church in Michigan, and it's the second oldest continuously operating Roman Catholic parish in America. Wow. So it's a landmark, an Assumption Church, which faces each other. So there really are twin churches. It was built in 1834. And then, we're going to be running out of time soon, so I'm just going to carry on until then. This is a really interesting story. There's a lot of books written about the early history of our region. We kind of do what's better known as like highlight reels. Our books tend to are very visual. I think there's over 1,200 photos in this book. But we love this story. On December 4th, 1838, a force of 140 American and Canadian supporters of William Lyon Mackenzie crossed the river from Detroit and landed 1 mile east of here. After capturing and burning barracks in Windsor, they took possession of the city. In this vicinity, they were met and routed by a force of 130 militiamen commanded by Colonel John Prince. 4 of the invaders were taken prisoner and were executed summarily by order of Colonel Prince. This action caused violent controversy in Canada and the United States. The remaining captors were tried and sentenced in London, Upper Canada. 6 were executed, 18 transported to penal colony in Tasmania, and 16 were deported. And for years after that, the Americans would burn effigies of Colonel John Prince. So, okay. I would like to leave enough time and just quickly show a couple of more things, how we're connected. A lot of people don't know about Fort Wayne, which was built in 1842 at the Detroit River's narrowest point. But this fort never fired a shot because they were worried about what happened with Colonel Prince. They were worried about the Canadians invading the U.S., if you can imagine. And we also have a fort in Amherstburg. So the river contains 2 forts, which I think is a pretty interesting fact. Um, One last thing. What really united the 2 cities was fire. In 1805, a fire destroyed the entire Detroit settlement only weeks before the Michigan Territory was established. At that time, the entire population of Detroit was 600. Give me a sec here. Reflecting upon the blaze's impact on the fledgling outpost, Father Gabriel Richard, assistant pastor of St. Anne's Church, wrote, Speramus meliora, resurgit cineribus, Latin for we hope for better things that will arise from the ashes. The motto was later inscribed on the Detroit flag and continues to be the motto of Detroit. The good news in 1805, it paved the way for a complete redesign of Detroit's center, featuring circular plazas and hexagonal blocks as envisioned by territorial judge Augustus Woodward, who modeled the design after Pierre L'Enfant's ambitious plans for Washington, D.C., which was modeled on Paris. Windsor suffered 2 major fires in 1849 and 1871. Detroit ended up coming to our rescue, and this is a great photo. It shows the water pumper that was put on the boat at the last minute. And if it wasn't for the great efforts of the Detroit firefighters, Windsor would have been completely burned. And after the second fire in 1871, which is connected to the Great Fire of Chicago, there were many fires at that time because of the high winds and dry conditions. Windsor decided to initiate a plan where commercial buildings would have to be built by brick to ensure the fire. So because of these great connections between the 2 cities, Windsor felt so grateful that they had this horn built, and what a horn acted as a loudspeaker for firemen, as so the chief could direct the firemen during the fires. They didn't have loudspeakers back then or any way to communicate, so he would yell through this horn. And inscripted on this horn is presented to the Fire Brigade of Detroit by the inhabitants of Windsor and Sandwich as a testimonial of their gratitude for the noble and generous conduct in crossing the river under the direction of Mr. Duncan, the chief engineer, during the intensely cold night of 16th of April, 1849, with their engines, by means of which, under their able and unwearied exertions and management, the local destruction of the village of Windsor by fire was mainly prevented. And here we see the 2 chiefs on the bridge with the horn. So that's a great story. And just to wrap up, in 1967, Windsor Fire Chief Harry Coxon, who is in the photo, developed a strong rapport with Detroit Fire Chief Charles Quinlan. When Coxon heard reports regarding the Detroit riots insurrection on that black day in July in 1967, he did not hesitate to offer assistance. 109 of Windsor's 245 firefighters battled blazes in Detroit from 1,600 alarms spread over 132 streets. 3 days of nonstop action. The situation abated, and Windsor firefighters returned home through the Windsor-Detroit tunnel. In an unfortunate set of circumstances, a disgruntled tunnel employee made these valiant men pay tolls for their vehicles. When the story leaked to the press, there was outrage on the Detroit side. In a show of solidarity, Detroiters continued to mail envelopes filled with toll money to Windsor's fire chiefs for 2 years after the incident. So, okay. I think we can now have Elaine read us a story or two from our book. Yeah, so that's the debt repaid, what we call closing the circle. Okay. You
All
want to
right.
jump in?
Yeah, here's the book, by the way, everyone, if you can see it. And I'm going to be reading a story from page. Okay, there's 400 pages in the book, incidentally. So let me see. The first one I'm going to read is called Smuggling a 5-Room House, and it is found on page 332. And this is a very interesting story. I think you'll enjoy it. In the 1920s, a resourceful Canadian pulled off a remarkable feat. He smuggled a 5-room house across the Detroit River. This mystery man owned a roadhouse in Detroit, but Prohibition left his business in ruins. Unwilling to leave the house he cherished, he devised a daring plan. On his farm across the river, he dug a basement and laid a foundation. Then, with the help of a barge, he carefully raised his Detroit house, floated it across the river, then rolled it onto its new foundation, all in a single night. Neighbors were astounded. They couldn't figure out how the hell that house was built in just one night, he later recounted. Despite his unconventional method, he downplayed the audacity of his actions, saying, "Well, that was the biggest thing I ever heard of that was smuggled. I didn't mean to smuggle it, but I liked my house and didn't want to leave it over there." And of course, smuggling is a long and interesting tradition for Windsorites, especially who cross the river to Detroit to buy all kinds of things. A lot of times, clothing for school, and kids would wear their 3 or 4 layers of clothes underneath their, their coats, and it would be summer, and they'd somehow get across, and the customs agents wouldn't even notice. These kids were bundled up and sweating to death. Anything to save a buck. The other story I'm going to read is something that was in the river. And in this case, a lot of things actually fallen, or in this case, dived into the river. In this case, it was a hippopotamus, believe it or not. Cannonball, the hippo, was shipped from Buffalo. This is on page 334, by the way, aboard the steamer Caldwell, currently one of the attractions in Bailey's quadruple circus. Since his immense cage could not be loaded onto the steamer, it was shipped by land, while Cannonball, accompanied by Ali, his Egyptian captor and keeper, traveled by sail to Detroit. During the voyage, the behemoth gazed longingly at the water, no surprise, as if yearning to plunge into its depths. However, no one anticipated he would actually act on his amphibious instincts, and thus no extra watch was placed on him. As the ship neared the city 3 miles below Fort Wayne, a sudden crash and splash were heard from the bow closest to the American shore. Unable to resist the temptation, the hippo had broken free from his bonds and leapt into the river, embarking on an unexpected aquatic adventure. The owner, who was on board, was visibly despondent. $40,000, along with a significant amount of prospective profits, had seemingly vanished. Ali, the Egyptian keeper, was nearly frantic. A few moments later, the massive head of the hippopotamus emerged above the water's surface. A general shout arose, and a boat was lowered. Ali jumped into the boat and rowed quickly towards the animal, who was joyfully swimming. At the sound of his master's voice, the hippopotamus paused and looked around. However, as the boat drew closer, the animal dived again, leaving behind a whirlpool of turbulent water. For a while, there was no sign of him. until he reappeared about 100 yards away, closer to the shore. Ali shouted, "Get me the dog!" A large black mastiff trained to sleep in the hippopotamus's cage had been howling since his companion's escape. The dog was promptly released, plunging into the river and swimming towards the hippo. Upon seeing the dog, the hippopotamus raised his massive head out of the water. The dog barked wildly and swam rapidly towards him, with Ali following in the boat. As the dog reached the animal, he began circling it in the water before swimming towards the shore. The hippopotamus followed closely. Once the animal reached dry land, Ali, armed with a small rawhide, jumped onto the beach. Speaking a few words in his native Egyptian tongue, he calmed the animal and drove it without further incident to a safe location. There, the hippopotamus was secured and appropriate measures were taken to transport him to the city. He now resides in fine condition, seemingly none the worse for his adventurous escapade beneath the waves. At least he did reside there, because that was from Detroit Free Press, June 13th, 1863. So hard to imagine. The Detroit River not only had, how many beavers were there? Millions, but one hippopotamus at one time. So many amazing stories about the river, the crossing of the river, things that happened during crossings, and people that decided to swim across the river after a few beers. We know about that. That was a couple times recently. So I'm not sure. How much time do we have left, by the way? Can someone tell me?
You have another about 10 minutes.
Oh, around 10 minutes. Okay, because I
Sure.
want to tell, if I may, the story, one of the most fascinating stories that I found when we were doing the research for the book. And it was when we were trying to determine when exactly the border was laid between Windsor and Detroit along the river. As Chris mentioned, people could just cross back and forth without showing any kind of ID, let alone talking to anybody about why they were crossing. But before there was the river, before the tunnel under the river and the bridge, and hopefully two bridges over the river, people would cross by ferry boat. There were a lot of ferry boats between Windsor and Detroit, and also Walkerville and Detroit. In, I believe, 1868 or thereabouts, there was a shooting on a ferry boat that was crossing from Detroit to Windsor. And it was a fatal shooting. And it was an estranged husband who shot his wife when he saw her board the vessel to cross over to Windsor, where she was living with her paramour. And the reason he was so upset to see her was because when she said she was leaving him, she promised she would take good care of their children. I believe they had 4. But he discovered that she did not take care of them and had actually put them into an orphanage. So he was very, very upset when he saw her board the boat, and he followed her just to talk to her. However, things escalated and he ended up shooting her, and she died. Now, that's bad enough. But the reason this story is so remarkable is because the fact that they couldn't determine which side of the river the shooting had occurred and that when she had died. Because if she had been shot on the Detroit side of the river, he would have been taken to court and tried. However, and probably jailed, of course, but in the case that was found guilty of murdering her, on the Canadian side, believe it or not, we had capital punishment back then when when Michigan did not. I guess Ontario had it and Michigan did not have it. So that would be executed if he were found guilty. Now, they captured him. They jailed him in Sandwich. He got away. He escaped back to the American side, and I believe they found him in Chicago, and they brought him back. And he was put on trial and found to be guilty. They determined that the killing had actually been carried out on the Canadian side, which meant he would be executed, and he would be executed in Sandwich on the Canadian side. Now, this was international news, not just between Canada and the US, but around the world. It was a very salacious story, of course, the way the media would handle things back then. And so by the time his execution was to occur, which would be a public hanging, there was a clamor for tickets. They actually sold tickets to the public so they can see this man who was actually, not really, in my mind, to blame for what had happened all completely because of the actions of his wife. But anyway, he was found guilty, and so there were 250 tickets sold, and only one woman, actually a 16-year-old girl, was one of the ticket buyers. So they all made their way to the execution site, and they watched him being executed. And there was a clamor to try to get pieces of the rope because it was such a notorious event, and he was considered such a terrible killer. So that was, to me, just an incredible story. Oh, and finally, of course, he made one last trip across the river, when his body was transported back to Detroit to be buried beside his estranged wife, if you can believe it. Not sure what happened to his children, if there are any descendants still living. It would be really, or in the area, it would be really interesting to find out whether they know anything more about the story or if they even know about it, because sometimes these things aren't discussed. So that is, as I say, one of my favorite stories. I see that we have put up where our books can be found. Basically, if you go to our website, walkerville.com, you can find all the retail locations on the Windsor side. Currently, we're just available on the Windsor side. At the Indigo locations and through our Walkerville Publishing House here in Walkerville, and you can call the number there, or just go to walkerville.com and send us an email, or follow us on Facebook. We do have a Facebook group called A River Runs Between Us, which has about 9,000 members, and there are lots of photos and stories and memories put up by people all the time on that group. So, anything else you want to say, Chris?
No, I think you covered it. I just wanted to know if there was any questions from the
Yeah.
Zoom members.
So Elaine, you're saying that it's not available to purchase over in the States, but could people
Not right now.
Do you ship over there? If somebody was to email you and say they wanted a copy, would you ship it over?
Yeah, we could probably ship through one of our independent bookstores over here.
Yeah,
So that could be
Biblioasis.
arranged.
Yeah, Biblioasis will ship the books.
Okay, that's good to know.
It's gotten really complicated because of the new tariffs to ship books, and we are making arrangements to be in Detroit later this year with the book.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to turn your camera back on so we can see you again.
Start
We
my
have
video.
a question.
There we are.
Were the contests of the beauty pageant from different states in America? The person asking
Yes.
the question said it was hard to see the sashes.
Sorry?
They said it was hard to see the sashes, so they were wondering if they were from different states.
Oh, yeah, sashes. I'm sorry. Yeah, they came from all over. I would expect mostly from the Midwest and Eastern United States. I'm not 100% sure. I know there's a documentary that's been done on the greatest show on earth as well. And there's probably more detail than we have, but we know for sure that it was very popular, and they especially came from the United States. It was a big deal.
Okay. Then there was
Yeah.
a comment, somebody commenting on the Ford Motor picture. It was fun to see the men hanging out the windows of the Ford Motor Group photo. So that was
Yeah.
a comment.
Yeah, that's a
all I
lovely
have.
photo. Yeah. Yeah, so again, I think we're like right on time, which is good. Obviously, we have a lot more stuff. There's, as we said, over 1,200 photos. Our books tend to be more pictorial than textual. There's lots of really interesting stuff in it, tying this connection. We were shocked to discover that there had never been a proper book done about the relationship between Detroit and Windsor. And as a note regarding the current situation with our two governments, we decided not to put anything in about what's going on with the current situation, even though it was happening by the time we got to the print deadline, because we feel like this story hasn't been written yet. But it does point out how fast things can spiral out of control when it comes to governments. And people are very upset about the situation with the cross border at the moment and the tariffs in particular. And we hope that this will be a matter that's resolved and only a footnote in our great history between each other. We have families that are deeply connected to each other on both sides of the river, and we have to remember these things when we get emotional and upset about politicians trying to change our lives. And that's all I'm going
Actually,
to say about
somebody did
that's all I'm
mention
going to
that.
say about that.
Somebody did mention that. Just a comment about many early settlers had families on both sides, and there's still families on both sides.
Yeah.
And I
And
read,
go
sorry,
ahead.
just a quick note. I just read that Canada has passed a new bill that if Americans can trace their ancestry to being born, having family that was born in Canada, there's now a new path to citizenship.
Mhm.
So that is really interesting. This law has just been passed because many Americans have deep ties to Canada. In fact, the pathway into Detroit often passed through Windsor. People in Detroit that I know all have deep connections to Canada and generationally. So just
And,
news
and
that's
with you saying that, Chris, is called the bill C5, and there
see.
has been a great increase of requests coming into all of the branches of Ontario Ancestors of Americans asking if we can help them, locate the birth information, the needed birth information for, one of their ancestors. So they definitely are taking advantage of that. So
My
there is a
Wonderful.
question
cousin,
from Ann Ryder. She first has a comment. She said, my great aunt who lived in Detroit bought a small residential lot in Windsor in the mid 1920s. It was inland a bit and seemed to be in a neighborhood of all small lots. Then I asked her where it was, and she said it was around Daytona Ave, which was about a block from the main road to the Ambassador Bridge. But she wondered if these lots were related to the Prohibition time, or perhaps people were building small vacation homes in that area. Do you happen to know?
I don't know particularly about that area. I know you could get lots of information from the Windsor Public Library in their historical department. They have all kinds of maps and all kinds of information guides, directories, etc. I do know that Windsor's coast, its 90-mile coast, was very, very popular with Detroiters. In fact, one of the main connections that we have with Detroiters is cottages along Lake Erie, cottages along the river, and cottages in Lake St. Clair. And in fact, Detroiters often talk about how they would go to Canada. They would never say they're going to Windsor. They were always going to Canada. And that would be their deep connection to us. And we talk about in the book how that's how Detroiters got a taste for Canadian beer. And that's why they love Canadian beer so much, because they came to the cottage and drank Canadian beer.
Doreen says, very good presentation. And Stephanie Stone, wonderful talk. I already have several of your books and I really enjoy them.
Well, thank you
Great.
very much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. So come and see us at walkerville.com or on Facebook or whatever. Come visit Elaine and we can sign them for you. It's a great, great keepsake. We're really thrilled with this book, not because we did it, because of the topic was so amazing. Like Elaine was saying, these stories, they just go on and on about the river and how we're connected.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I don't see any more questions. Tammy, do you see any more? Oh, Anne
no, I
is
do not have any more questions, but it was a very nice presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so
okay.
much. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
Anne wrote back. She said, "Thank you so much. I hope to get the book when they come to the States, to the U.S."
Okay, good.
Yeah. Thanks so
All right. Well,
much.
thank you for getting up early this morning, Chris, and joining us. We appreciate it. And
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Elaine, thank you so much for the stories. We all look forward to
Sure.
reading your book. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good night, good morning.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. See you in April.
Namaste.